We've got some work to do now on the 2012 Yukon. This has got the 6.2 and all-wheel drive, and in the last 2 days we noticed an issue. It was hard to start when it was cold. It was cranking for a while, and there's a strong fuel odor coming from outside the truck. So I took my scope camera and I looked above the fuel tank, as I was advised to do, and yeah, the sending unit's gone bad on it. So I'm waiting on parts to arrive. They're supposed to be here tomorrow morning, but I gotta get started on it. It's Friday night. So I'm going to try to pull the tank tonight and get everything prepped for tomorrow, and then hopefully get the sending unit back in tomorrow and pop it back together. Let's see. Took a little bit of setup, but I think I'm finally ready to go under there. The biggest question I'm going to have to answer before I go too far is, do I have enough space physically to get the tank out? So I'm actually going to measure just to make sure that if I drop the tank where it is, that I actually have enough clearance to get the tank out from underneath the truck. But yeah, I got some fuel lines to detach. The tank straps have to come off, and yeah, should be a bit of an adventure. Hopefully I can get it out tonight and prep it as much as possible. So here goes nothing. So removing the fuel tank, you've got a few disconnections to make. There's 2 tank straps to start, one toward the front portion of the tank and one toward the rear portion of the tank. You can see one here and one further back. At the front corner of the tank, you reach up and over the frame rail here, and there's a fuel line connection there. It's a quick connect so it can pop out. And on the opposite corner of the front of the tank, there's a secondary connection. I think that's an Evap line. Same story. That's a quick connect. You can pop that apart and open it up. Let's go to the rear of the tank and see the rest of the connections we have to deal with. Okay, so this is the rear axle. There's the rear driver's side leaf spring. If we look up at the rear of the fuel tank, we've got the filler neck hose that has to come off. That's a gear clamp. And then next to that is another Evap line with a quick connect. So that's simple. And almost directly behind those guys, let's see, there we go. That's an Evap canister. So the 2 lines on the Evap canister, the cream colored connector and the black one, those both have to be removed. Now the hidden connection is actually located above the fuel tank, and you're going to be able to reach up there and feel it more than anything. But it's one last Evap line, and it comes from an elbow at the top of the tank, and then it goes back into the tank itself. I don't know if you guys are going to get a chance to see up there. I think you can see just the end of it. But that line has to be undone as well, because that goes up and over a body mount or a frame support or something up there, some form of a structure, and you cannot take this tank down without undoing that connector. Once you've got all those connections removed, you can then drop this fuel tank. So let's get rolling. So one of the quick disconnects here is right at the front corner of the tank, next to the back of the transfer case here. It's just a push style where you squeeze both clips together and push the retainer out. So I'm going to need 2 hands to take that apart. Okay, that's now undone. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, well, the second fuel line disconnect is at the driver's side most front corner, and it's above the cross member. It's a really tricky spot to see. I haven't actually laid eyes on it yet, but I'm going to try to pop that connector out. It's the same connector as the other line had. See if I can't do this with just by hand. But so I think I finally got it disconnected. You can see my hand jammed way up in there. Yep, I've got the connector opened up. Pull that fuel line apart now. It's open. All right, we had a little bit of fuel leak out of there, to be expected, but my pressure's gone because the brake at the opposite end there, so I don't think I have too much to worry about. Okay, so I think the next game is going to be to start getting this tank, the tank straps loosened up. So I'll break the bolts loose first, and then I'm going to prop this up so it can't possibly fall. All right, so now we are over top of the rear axle on the driver's side, and we've got to undo the vent tube, the atmosphere vent, and then the fill neck has to come off the tank as well before we can drop it. So let's get that disconnected. Okay, vent tube is open. All right, and I gotta get a socket and take off the gear clamp for the fill neck. All right, I was able to get the gear clamp off of the filler neck. Now, just gotta break the seal loose here. Hopefully it's not too stuck. Oh yeah, I think it'll come off all right. Just gonna take a little bit of wiggling. It's kind of in a tricky spot to reach up there with the camera in the way. Well, it took me a little bit of fighting, but I was able to get the filler tube off. I looked right past the charcoal canister there. So those have to come off now, but that shouldn't be so bad. Looks like they just snap and come off there. Just reaching into these spots is an awkward grab. Okay. Okay, I found the last two lines that went into the canister, and I fought for a while, but I was able to finally remove them. Now I think I can actually drop the tank. All right, I finally got the that tank out. That was way harder than I had thought it was because of a hidden line. I couldn't see it. It's right here. It goes from the tank to the tank, so there was really no way to see that without looking at the book first and knowing it's there. But essentially, that's what had to be popped apart before it could come off, because there's a cross member through there, so it's essentially tied to the tank. Alrighty. So, looks like my issue is the sending unit, the way it's rusted through. So I want to get the lock ring open. I want to get the sending unit up and out. I got to clean all this debris off. Yeah, and we'll go from there. I think I'll start up the leaf blower, blow all the loose stuff off of this, and then sweep it up, clean it, and so on and so on. Alrighty. Well, I'd say it looks pretty clean right now considering what it is and where it's normally buried. So, The lock ring is the next thing that I want to try and address here. See if I can open this up. I did use the leaf blower and clean the top end of this thing as much as I could. Try to knock all the loose debris off, and scrubbed it with the broom too, again to try to clean it out. So I'm going to see if I can't make this move a little bit tonight. Wish me luck. Alright, I've removed the fuel lines and I've sprayed it with some oil. Hopefully it's going to soak in a little bit there and loosen up that lock ring. And let me remove this thing from the fuel tank. Eventually it will, so the requirement here is that you use a brass punch and a hammer, and typically use that to dislodge everything. Now, brass is key because the brass doesn't spark. And you can imagine you're working on a fuel tank that's got fuel in it. So if you make a spark on top of fuel, well, you know, put 2 and 2 together and see what happens. Alternately, with some large enough pliers, you can also put force onto the lock ring, just like so. And squeezing alternately, you know, you might have an opportunity to kick that loose. Maybe if it's not rusted. But this is a Southern Ontario vehicle, and we love to oversalt the roads. So here we are. I'm going to save you the details and use a punch and try to just get that kicked free. Alright, it took a little bit of coaxing, but I was able to get the lock ring loose. So you can get replacement lock rings if you end up damaging this thing or have to physically cut it off to remove it, depending on how rusted it is. It's possible. So something to take note of right now is the orientation of the fuel sending unit. It's important because it has to match up with your new lines, or with your, the new piece has to match up with the existing lines. In my case, it's pretty easy because the molded lines go into a holster and straight into the sending unit. So I can see pinholes in these lines, the supply and return, so it's obvious. You can see how thin this is too. It's got almost nothing left. If I bend these once or twice, they're going to be busted. So the sending unit, I'll pull that out tomorrow. I'm going to leave it closed for tonight just to keep it from getting too contaminated in there, because I have about half a tank of fuel in here and it sure is heavy. So I'm going to try to clean up this lock ring a little bit, and that'll be it for right now. Tomorrow morning I'll pick up the new sending unit tomorrow morning, and then I'll try to get it all reassembled and slapped back on in. We are back. We have the parts too, which is awesome. So last night, about 11 o'clock or so is when I called it quits. And it was at that time I had the lock ring off. The sending unit was removed, the old one that's rusted through. We figured the lines were the place where the issue was. So for the sake of the night, I just covered the open void in the fuel tank to try to keep any additional debris out of there. I grabbed a magnet today because it looks like there's some rust that made its way into the tank. So this is probably one of the easy ways to get it out of there, and it is coming out nice. My plan is to run a little bit of fuel just into some jerry cans before I actually connect this back to the truck. So I'm going to put the sending unit in, hook up the fuel lines, and because this guy has a fuel line disconnect, and it's unhooked at the front of the tank, there's a line there that ties in. I should be able to just take that line and put it into the end of a gas can, turn the pump on. That'll do two things. It'll flush the line, but it'll also test the pump, make sure everything's working correctly before I go and remount it back into the truck permanently. So I'm just going to clean this guy out and prep everything, get it ready to rock, and then we're going to get to installing the new sending unit. Remove label, follow assembly instructions. Perhaps we will. Just to make sure we don't have any issues here. And the new float is identical to the previous one, so that's good. The sending unit also looks exactly the same, which is perfect. Perfect. Okay, it's time to drop this pump in place. not literally speaking, but let's say install it. That sounds better, right? I'll have to grab that other return line later. Okay. I'm just trying to get the float in at the moment. There we go. Float is in. Alrighty. I have to get that line. There we go. Okay, return line is connected. Now, we place the sending unit in. We've got to press it down onto the gasket and then install the lock ring. Okay, so that's the premise of the installation of the sending unit there. Our lock ring drops over top, fits onto the teeth, and then we just casually rotate into place until it's locked. I'm going to tap that into place, and then I'm going to shoot this with a little bit of paint, try to prevent some of the future rusting, hopefully so. So we got a little bit of paint on there now, hopefully to slow the rust down the next time around. It's kind of a disappointment to see the amount of rust that happened there. Now I do have about 180,000 kilometers on the truck. It's a 2012, so it's not new by any means, but obviously that still, it's the only spot that really rusted on the truck is right there. Kind of silly. So I had the connector ports plugged, and I made a point not to fill up the evap breather sensor there, because if you did, or the atmosphere sensor, whatever you want to call that fella, if you did cover that up, then you're not going to let the tank breathe properly. You're going to throw an engine light. I also left the caps for the fuel lines on, naturally. So we're going to get these fuel lines plugged back in and start getting this thing reassembled and ready to go back on the truck. Alrighty. All right, fuel lines are connected now. Okay, cool. And this is the breather hose that goes over top of that frame rail support. So this gets plugged in, but only after it's back up on top and in the truck, so to speak there. The tank had quite a bit of stress on this joint. I didn't see it was there until it was too late. I missed this initially. So next time, if I knew that, I would look for this clamp and release it, because then, if this is open, you get a little bit more slack to work with, and it'd be easier to undo. You could probably take it right out, because it does backtrack to the Evap canister. If you took all these clamps off, you could probably leave this connected. But that's okay. It's done now, so I'm not going to worry about it. I do want to test this fuel system, so I'm going to hook the connectors up and shoot some fuel into a fuel tank just to make sure that everything works as it should before I physically go and reinstall it into the truck. Plus, that flushes the line out, so if there's any debris in there, it's going into a jerry can, and I'll use it in the lawnmower or something, no big deal. So let's get that set up. All right, so I came up with a plan. This is for the fuel tank hanger. Basically, the, what is it called, the capture nut? The capture nut busted off when I was trying to take the tank strap out. So I need something that I can mount and kind of leave in there. So I've got this, I think this was a safety seat belt for a child seat from a Cadillac DeVille, or anyway, it was some kind of bracket or whatever. So I'm basically going to cut it off at this line, and that mount is getting welded to the washer and to the nut. So then the bolt will just freewheel up inside, and that finger now will just keep this thing from spinning inside the space. That should be enough to jam it up in place and take it out if I ever needed to. Hopefully that's going to do the job for the sake of a strap. The bolt is actually larger diameter than the original, so strength isn't going to be an issue. Just got to clean some paint and then weld this thing together. Okay, well, I don't have my welding gloves. I don't have my welding mask. I don't have the Lincoln welder. I have this one, but it put the floors in the Pontiac, so that's got to be something. I'm just going to squint myself through it and hopefully be able to lay something at the washer where it meets the bracket, and then at the nut where it meets the washer. So then the nut will stay fixed to the washer to the bracket. I'll cut this off after, and I'll be able to put the bolt in from underneath once it's in position. Let's see what's going to happen here. Alright, so hopefully this sort of helps explain everything. And then my bolt runs in there. And then once this retainer is in the socket where it fits, it's not going to be able to freewheel. It'll be able to move, but because of the lip that's going to be on there, it's not going to be able to just turn on its own free will. So that should be just as suitable as any factory mount. Obviously, goober welds. I'm working with with no mask, with no gloves, and with an inappropriate machine for the job, so let's call that good enough. Okay. So if I put the key in and turn the ignition on, that primes the fuel pump. And what that's going to do is put pressure through this line. So I think the best answer here, from a testing standpoint, is to put this line inside a jerry can. Make sure that it can't come out easily. hopefully, and then go turn the key on and see that we do push fuel into this jug. That tells me the pump is functioning properly. It'll probably throw an engine code. Let's see here. I don't know if it looks for total pressure and then stops or if it's timed, but we're going to find out. I also want to see if the fuel sending unit float is working correctly. So I should see about half a tank of fuel is roughly what was in this can when I started, or the tank when I started. So let's see if that's going to work like I'm picturing. Okay, we'll start by putting the key in. Let's see if we can't get the display to come on, or the head. Okay. Should be shooting fuel now. It's showing quarter tank. Let's try this again. All right, let's check if we got fuel in there. None at all. I wonder if it needs a crank to be able to shoot fuel or how that works. Thought it normally did when I put the prime in, but who knows? Maybe the plugs aren't seated all the way. I just rechecked the connectors and turned the key one more time. It did shoot fuel, so I think the first time it was just air in the pump, which kind of makes sense, I guess. It hasn't pushed anything through the line yet, so there's a first time for everything. Let's see if we can't hear it this time. Now, it must not do it all the time. All right. Oh. There's fuel in there, so I'm going to do that a few more times just to flush out any debris that might be in that line. And then we'll put it back in and continue on the process here. Well, I got the tank back in, you just saw there. Everything plugs in a heck of a lot easier than it comes out. A little bit of fussing trying to get it up into place, but I'm working on an uneven concrete floor. The truck's only up on 3 2x whatevers, so I don't have a lot of space to work within. If it was on a lift, I think this would be a nicer job for sure. Still not awesome job or whatever, but certainly better than this. So let's prime it because we got air in the system for sure. That time I heard the pump bog down. So I'm going to shut it off. I'll pull the key out, I'll give it about a minute. I'll prime it one more time. And then we'll see if it's going to start.